Animating in games is way harder than it looks, and animating in general is probably a very difficult skill on its own. Animating is not just about movement and creating the animations, but the feeling of the animations is also something that is really important. So, the last few weeks we were busy creating our combat animations. And as you can see here, the first animations were really rough. It had no weight to them, no real clarity, it was just for movement, and like you probably know from our previous few devlogs, this was still for testing purposes, so we didn't really mind. It was just, okay, nice, we got animations working and they work in game and you can smack enemies on the head and it works. So that's really great. But then it was the time to create more animations that had more weight to them and that felt just way better to play with than the standard animations we just put in randomly. So here you can see our animations a week or two ago, and they are rough. They are really rough. They still don't have any weight to them. The weapon changed, like you can see. We decided to use a more greatsword type of weapon for our character. But the animation is still really rough and it's still clunky and it also feels too smooth. So let me tell you how we went from this animation to these animations, which feel a lot better in the game. But before we start talking about our animations, let's just talk about animations in general. There are for games a lot of different ways to make your animations, and there is no right one for every purpose. In high-level AAA games that use 3D models, it's really common to use a combination of rigging and mocap to achieve a really natural-looking animation. But in 2D, like we do, it's a lot different. You can still use rigging, and that's what we did in our game as well, but you also have another method, and that is just drawing everything frame by frame. Both of these have their strengths and weaknesses. When drawing frame by frame, it is really nice and easy to get a lot of detail in your character right away. But one of the weaknesses is that if you want to change something, you have to redraw everything, and rigging in that part is way simpler because you can just attach bones to certain polygons you want in your game, and your character should move with the same intent as you want to, but a lot more easy, and you can just keyframe these values to create your animation. And that is what we did in our game. We are just starting with art, so we thought it would be easier to use rigging as our base to create our animations. So that's what we did for our main character, and also kind of for the weapons. But for the combat we use a different approach than we did for the movement. For the movement everything is just rigging and it's really easy. You just move the bones around and you create your animations by keyframing it. And then you just play it in a loop to see if it looks fine, and if it looks fine you put it in the game. Does it look right in the game? Nice, you got your animations. But for combat we use something completely different. Well, not really different. We use a combination of two things. As you can see in our character right here, our weapons are free floating. That's just a style we really like in our games. Like if you look at Nier Automata for example, the weapons are also floating behind your back, and then when you attack they just fly in front of you. And we really like that, so we thought, yeah, why not use that in our game? But because the weapons are not an essential part of the player, we create our own fake bones for our weapons. Like if you can, as you can see here, we have our weapon pivot, and our weapon pivot, that is for the rotation of the weapon. Set that to be somewhat behind the player, kind of in line with his shoulder, so it feels natural if the weapon rotates around the player. And then we have our weapon offset, which we use for just the X and Y offset to get a nice feeling of it. And we started animating that, and that really worked well. So after some playing around, that's the animations we came up with that you saw earlier, and were still kind of crappy. So we looked at some animation theory and thought, why does it not feel good to play? It feels slowish, it felt like it didn't have a lot of weight to it. So how can we change that? And a lot of the times it just has to do with timings. If you look at our animation we had, it's really long for an attack. The attack was more than 60 frames long, so the whole attack costs around 1.2 seconds to just land on the enemy, and that's too much for a game that you want to have speedy combat in. If you use a really slow weapon in a really slow game, you can get away with it, of course. But our game is all about flashiness, doing quick actions, and it just needed to be a lot faster. So the first thing we did was we cut the frames from 60 to just 30 frames. So the animation at a max could be half a second long, and that changed a lot of things already. But now the attack felt unreadable and it didn't feel responsive at all. So we looked at some animation theory again, and we learned about the anticipation phase, the swing phase, and the recovery phase. The anticipation is the first part of your attack, and it will probably take up around half of your animation because the startup frames are supposed to be longer than the impact frames. If you have a long anticipation, or at least a clear anticipation, you will know what the character is going to do before he or she is going to swing, and that creates a sense of knowledge in attacks you didn't even see beforehand. And then you have your swing and impact moments. These are just a few frames long and will probably be shorter than you first initially thought it would be. But that's a good thing, because if you want to make your character feel fast, the impact should come fast. And then you have your recovery phase, and your recovery phase is used for your swing after your hit or getting back to a starting position or a new position to combo into different attacks. So we had the new animation for our weapon and it felt way better already, but it missed something that frame by frame animation has, and that is the effects. When drawing frame by frame, you can use something that's called a smear frame. A smear frame is a frame where the weapon gets stretched out and it creates the illusion of speed. But in rigging this is way more difficult because you animate bones and the whole weapon as a whole and you don't draw every frame. So how did we fix that? Well, we just broke the model to create the illusion of having a smear frame. If I pause the animation right here, you can see that the animation of the weapon is broken. The weapon blade is way bigger than it is supposed to be, but because it just stays for one frame, you get the illusion of a smear frame, and that's exactly what we want. But the attack missed some visual effects. So we thought about it for a moment and we came up with the solution. Yeah, we need to draw some additive parts to the weapon to make it feel more like a swing you would see in games you already play. So we created what's called a trail. The trail basically follows the weapon. When you swing, it just kind of lags behind, and it creates more of the illusion of speed in it and more impact on it as well, because your weapon just feels like it has more motion in it than it actually does. And because the swing part of your animation is typically really tiny, it doesn't even matter if it's moving or not. So we can just say in the animator, okay, on the impact frame, have the trail active, and then 2 frames after that, have it deactivated as a whole. And it gives the illusion that it animates with your swing, which is really amazing. And that in combination with using what's called a hit stop, where you and the enemy freezes for just a brief moment when you hit the enemy, creates a really good impact moment, and that just took our combat to a whole new level. And now it was time for our enemy. The enemy generally follows the same rules as the player does, except that the anticipation phase of your attack is handled a bit differently. In the player, it's really easy because you have your anticipation when you're going to swing, and you know because you press the button you are probably going to swing in the next few frames. But with an enemy, it is different because the player needs to be able to react to that attack. So the anticipation isn't handled in, okay, how many frames do we want it to be, where it generally looks good? No, we definitely do not want that. We want to use the player's average reaction time to calculate how much frames the anticipation of an attack should be. The average human has a reaction time of 0.25 seconds. So if you use 0.25 seconds as your anticipation frame, and use the time it takes to register an input, you should have a good enough opportunity to time your block or your dodge or your parry to react to the enemy's movement. Because the actual swing of the enemy is not reactable, because that happens in maybe 2 or 3 frames. So the anticipation phase of an enemy is what should be reacted to. So for enemies, the anticipation phase of an animation is way more important than the actual hit of an animation. So once we played around with that for a bit, we got combat to feel really close to what we would like. Of course, there's still a lot to be done, and a lot of tweaking to be handled, a lot of effects to be added, sound effects to be added. But for something that is made in 9 weeks, we are really proud of how far we came along with our animations and our combat feel in general. So the base of our combat almost is completely finished by now, and from now on it's just adding effects and tweaking things a bit till it feels perfect and hits that sweet spot. But we are already really close, because even when I play it and I make the game, it feels really nice to land that parry and to break an enemy's guard and to be able to attack and kill him. It just feels really good. So we will keep developing it and letting you guys know about how things go, and we will hope that you like to follow our journey along with us. The Freaky Frogs are out.